Joining us live is Social Services Minister Anne Ruston to discuss issues in your portfolio. But first, I will just ask you about what Trudy mentioned there, Ms Ruston. Do you think that the Prime Minister should be more open about what information we're handing over to the Americans?
Well, the Prime Minister's obviously made comments in relation to our willingness to assist in the investigation, and I think the Foreign Minister's made further comments this morning, and I think it's probably appropriate to leave any further comments in relation to this particular investigation to either the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister.
The Foreign Minister has said that they are doing everything required of them, but that they will be not using any of those secret communications. Is that fair enough, do you think?
Well, look, I think the Foreign Minister's made her position very clear about the appropriateness of the disclosure of various information in relation to this or any other investigation, and I think it's best to leave it to the Foreign Minister to make the appropriate comments in this space.
All right, so if we move on to the redress scheme, you've announced yesterday that there has been an uptake in the number of institutions signing on. It's still concerning, though, that there are a number of high-profile institutions that haven't signed on.
Look, absolutely, and that's why just last week I sent another 40 letters to institutions indicating to them that there really is an expectation, not just by government but I think by the wider community, that if they have a history of working with children that they really should sign up to the scheme. And so I'm hopeful that this reminder that I've sent out last week will see further institutions join up so that we can make sure that we have the maximum number of institutions that deal with children part of the scheme, so that we can give the redress to people who have been victims in the past that they so much want and need.
Some victims advocacy groups are saying that any religious institutions that refuse to sign up for the redress scheme should lose their charitable tax exempt status. Is that something you're considering?
Well, look, at the moment we're making sure that we work as hard as we possibly can to get every institution that should be part of this scheme, or we believe should be part of this scheme, signed up between now and the 30th of June 2020, which was the time period in which we gave ourselves to get institutions on board. Understanding that there's some quite complex issues that institutions need to deal with in terms of liability and their finances before they're able to sign up. Once we get to that position on the 30th of June next year, then obviously we'll be looking at all mechanisms that might be on the table to encourage those that haven't signed up by that date to make sure that they do.
But if they're only profitable because they're not paying tax, and then they're not going to pay victims of abuse that only were abused through their interaction with their religious organisations, why should they continue to enjoy a tax-exempt status?
Well, we've seen a huge number of religious organisations sign up. We've got over 40,000 sites now identified as being part of the scheme, and we will continue with our focus to make sure that we get them signed up. But that's not to say that sometime in the future, if they do continue to refuse to sign up and we don't have the constitutional power to compel them to sign up, then we may look at other means within our power to incentivise them to join the scheme.
How many people who've applied for compensation through the redress scheme have now received compensation?
Well, over 500, closer to 600 people have actually already received their compensation through the scheme. It had quite a slow start, probably largely to do, well, definitely largely to do with the process of getting institutions signed up in the first place. But we've seen a significant acceleration in the number of cases that have been able to be settled in the last 3 months, or the first 3 months of this financial year. And I will certainly have instructed my department to make sure that they make this the absolute highest priority, to make sure that claims that we have received are processed with the most expedience that they possibly can. So after, I think, we'd have to admit, quite a slow start to dealing with the claims, we have seen a significant increase, but that still needs to be worked on, and we need to increase that number as much as we possibly can.
And how many applications have you processed in that time? Because I know at July it was about 4,000 applications and only 215 have been processed. So if you've done 400 to 500 now, is that still at that 4,000 level of applicants, or have there been more?
Look, there are various it's a chain of events that have to occur within the process of an application being finally an offer of compensation or an offer of redress being made and that being paid. And so all of the applications that we received are in some stage of process, some much more complicated than others and require a lot more investigation. Sometimes we're talking about many institutions being involved in a particular case. So to say have been processed through to final application where an offer has been made and accepted, which is the 600, but every application we receive is in some state of processing.
So at a percentage, though, how many people who've applied have actually received money?
Well, as you pointed out, there in excess of 4,000 applications have been received to date. Over 600 people have actually received their redress payments to date. There are a number of others that offers are on the table for payments. I think there's about another 100 plus offers that are on the table, which people are considering whether they're going to accept the offer that's been made to them. There are many more in the final stages of assessment with the independent decision makers to determine what offer will be made based on the individual circumstances. But there are also a number that are still going through the process of identification and assessment, because, as I say, some of these cases are very, very complex and many of them happened a very long time ago. So it is unfortunate. It is not a simple process to assess these through to final redress offer.
Now, if we move on to one of the other issues that's been kicking along in your portfolio, it's been the drug testing of welfare recipients. You were quite open about the fact you were happy to take a drug test. We saw you make that statement to the Senate and then post photos of you doing the mouth swab, and you were more than happy to do that. Is that what most welfare recipients would do, though, or would they have to pee in a cup?
Well, the incident that I posted was an opportunity that was actually provided by Dr Lamming, who had an employment company in Parliament House demonstrating how drug testing occurred in the workplace, because as many people would understand who work in particular industries, drug testing and alcohol testing is just a part of their work life. But I did the mouth swab, but the determination as to what sort of test is taken will be designed as part of the design process. Should the legislation be able to succeed through the Senate, of course, will be designed with the company, the tenderer who wins the contract, to actually undertake the actual drug testing on behalf of the government. So the process will be determined through that as to what type of test, whether it be a hair follicle test, a urine test, or a saliva test. And they will be randomly determined as part of that process of the design of the trial project.
Would you agree that taking a urine test is more demeaning than taking a mouth swab?
Well, look, the reality is that this is something that happens in the workplace, and the people who are coming onto Newstart obviously are signing up for a work program. They want to get a job. They aren't able to at the moment, and so they're signing up through Newstart and Job Active to go and get a job. It is very likely that in many of the employment opportunities that will be presented to them, they will be required to do drug and alcohol testing, and one of those tests is likely to be a urine test, because that is a specific test for certain types of drugs. So this is a process of making people be job ready. You're likely to get drug and alcohol tested in the workplace, so it seems a reasonable thing that you should be able to be drug and alcohol tested randomly as part of the process to get into that employment.
When it comes to Newstart, there's been almost universal calls to raise Newstart. We've heard the Business Council of Australia as well as John Howard say that figure needs to go up, but you don't agree?
Well, I think that the issue around people who currently find themselves unemployed is much more complex than just the safety net payment that is provided by the Australian government's welfare system, taxpayer-funded welfare system. There's a lot more that we as government need to do. We need to make sure that we create jobs. We need to make sure that we create pathways to those jobs. But I think more importantly, it's about breaking down the barriers that people find that are preventing them from being able to get jobs. And one of those, obviously, is if you've got a drug or an alcohol addiction or problem, then we need to deal with that problem so that you don't have a barrier to work. So I think the government is been very clear about the investment that we're prepared to make sure that we break down the barriers so people don't find themselves precluded from having jobs because of other problems that exist in their lives.
In the Murray Valley Standard, you were quoted as saying that the New Start shouldn't be raised because giving people more money would do absolutely nothing. Probably all it would do is give drug dealers more money and give pubs more money. Do you think that's needlessly antagonistic of people who are on New Start?
Look, that wasn't, that's quite a false and misleading statement. I made the comment at that particular event that I was speaking at and said that we do need to make sure that we deal with the individual cohorts and the individual barriers to employment, and made the comment that if somebody had an alcohol addiction, then giving them extra money on New Start was more likely to result in that money being spent at a hotel. Giving more money to somebody who finds themselves in a situation of isolation is not going to prevent their isolation. We need to come up with more inventive and innovative ways to deal with the barriers that people find themselves in going into the workplace. And that is what the government is absolutely focused on doing.
So what is the government going to do in that space?
Well, there are a number of programs. I mean, obviously I've just mentioned one in terms of the drug trial, but we've got a try, test and learn program that's got 53 programs that are currently out there working with specific cohorts, whether they be young people, whether they be older people, whether they be women, whether they be people who find themselves with mental health as being a barrier to work, to try and work out what it is that's actually causing the barrier. How do we deal with that barrier so that they can get back into work? I mean, the Headspace program is another program that we've been working on to try and deal with anxiety of young people when they've constantly been turned away from jobs because they don't have experience, how they deal with that anxiety so that they're presenting to the employer as somebody that the employer will want to employ. So I think there are lots of really innovative ways that we can make sure that we get people back into work, because just constantly spending more money and not getting any better result is not the right thing for us to be doing. We need to make sure that we investigate every possible way that we can start getting a better result for getting people back into work.